That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, my dudes, we are going to be continuing our top 24 wide receiver rankings. I could not be more excited to do this, and I will say that no, we are not going to be going through and ranking all 24 wide receivers in one video. I think that if you were talking about 24 players in one video, how much can you actually be helping? How much analysis can you actually be putting into the analysis behind these players and these rankings? So I'm going to continue to break it down into 6 player segments because I think that's a really good mark where we have 3 to 4 minutes to go through, talk about each player, their entire range of outcomes, talk about their floor, their ceiling, why I'm ranking them where I am. And yeah, I think that's going to be a much better format. And of course, guys, we're live streaming every single night. So if you have yet to go down there, subscribe to the channel, but more importantly, you need to hit that bell next to the subscribe button. That way, you know when we go live, you can come out to our live streams because we're doing fantasy drafts every single night on Underdog Fantasy. And if you have not signed up for Underdog Fantasy yet, maybe you're going to go up against some random people. Maybe you want to go up in a draft against me in one of those live streams. Make sure you go take advantage of our deal where if you deposit $10 on Underdog Fantasy, in my opinion, by far and away the best place that you could play fantasy football this upcoming season, the best place you can become a better drafter. If you deposit $10, you're going to get an entire list of my 2021 rankings and tiers that are going to be consistently updated until the beginning of the season. You're also going to get my 2021 draft guide, hundreds of pages of information on how to adjust to your exact league settings and how to make sure you're optimizing for your format, as well as all those player profiles. And at the same time, you're going to get $25 added to your Underdog Fantasy account, and you're going to help this channel more than you could ever possibly imagine. So make sure you take advantage of that deal. Make sure you help us out by depositing $10 on Underdog Fantasy with promo code FLOCK. And that should be it. Let's dive into this video. Let's recap our first 12 receiver rankings. Let's just go quickly. I'm not going to give any analysis. We've already talked about all these guys. Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, Justin Jefferson, Keenan Allen, CeeDee Lamb, Allen Robinson, and Robert Woods. So now we're going to go with our wide receiver 13. I know a lot of people are going to be sitting here going, well, Mason, is this going to be Mike Evans? Is this going to be Terry McLaurin? Most people probably think it should be Terry McLaurin, but no, I'm going to be making this Chris Godwin. Okay, so I understand, guys, we've gotten a lot of people kind of giving me some hate when they read our draft guide going, Mason, why do you have Godwin this high? I mean, he disappointed us last year. We drafted him in the 2nd round, and he really didn't live up to that. And if you go through, yeah, that's completely true. Chris Godwin was actually the wide receiver 15 on a points per game basis. But what I really want to focus in on is, A, this was the first year that Tom Brady was in Tampa Bay. B, with Chris Godwin, what you actually had is a couple injuries to start the year, and those injuries are reoccurring halfway through that I don't want to say derailed his season, but definitely kind of made him a little handicapped in what we saw from 2019. And C, with Chris Godwin, and this is by far and away the most important thing that I want to focus in on, is the fact that when he was healthy, he was the most targeted wide receiver in all of Tampa. He was more targeted than Mike Evans. And I need to go through, and I know so many people are tired of hearing me say this, and I know I've gotten DMs of people telling me to stop saying this on the videos, but every time I bring up Chris Godwin, I am legally obligated to go through and to remind everyone exactly how dumb I am. If we go back and we look at his 2019 season and remember how elite of a talent Chris Godwin is, this is a year where he finished as the wide receiver 2 in fantasy, only behind Michael Thomas in points per game. And this was a season when he was going in the 4th round. So he was a clear league-winning wide receiver if you got him in the 4th round of your fantasy draft, and he came out and he was the wide receiver 2 overall. But going into the season, I actually came out and I said that Chris Godwin was the most overrated wide receiver in fantasy in 2019. Now, that isn't going to keep me from learning on our mistake, going, okay, well, we should have paid more attention to Bruce Arians and how he deployed his receivers in his offense, how he really didn't want to use the tight end position whatsoever. That means no O.J. Howard. And at the same time, Godwin was a fantastic prospect coming out of Penn State. And we go back to that 2019 year to remember how talented of a receiver Chris Godwin is. This is someone that had over 8.5 targets a game. He had over 0.6 touchdowns per game, which I think is actually sustainable in this format, because when you're going to be playing in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense, we understand that the passing volume, the passing attempts shouldn't necessarily be leading the NFL, but the efficiency that you're going to have from Tom Brady, as well as every receiver in this offense, should be near the very top of the NFL. So it's going to be one of the few players that I'll say expecting half a touchdown per game, I think is actually completely reasonable when you're playing in this offense. And at the same time, he was incredibly efficient on a per target basis, where he comes out, he has 95 receiving yards a game on only 8.5 targets a game. Now, translate this over to 2020, and I understand, guys, yes, he drops down to being a high-end wide receiver too, and it's the craziest thing that we're looking at ever here, and that I'm telling you that Chris Godwin is my wide receiver 13 for this upcoming season. This is a player that should continue to get better. He's 25 years old. Chris Godwin is 25 years old. And he finished as the wide receiver 15 last year, when throughout the entire season, he was dealing with a multitude of injuries. He had more volume than Mike Evans did. Mike Evans had a higher touchdown rate, but we know you chase the volume, you fade touchdown efficiency. So all signs, in my opinion, point to chasing the younger wide receiver in this offense, the more efficient wide receiver in this offense, and the player that has seen more volume than Mike Evans over the past few seasons. So Chris Godwin is going to be my wide receiver 13. If you think Brady can lead the NFL in passing, I really have no idea why you would not be drafting Chris Godwin with where he is going. Okay, so now let's go find a receiver that I had embarrassingly way too low, way too low in our first edition of our rankings, in our first edition of that draft guide. This is going to be Cooper Kupp, who we previously had ranked at wide receiver 20 overall. And this was something that I have to be completely honest with. I do not know how I made the mistake of ranking Cooper Kupp this low, because we have been all aboard the Robert Woods train for all offseason now. Ever since they acquired Matthew Stafford, I've been coming out and saying that Robert Woods has the potential to be a top 5 wide receiver in fantasy. Yet at the same time, I was a little reluctant to rank Cooper Kupp in the top 14 as we have. We've moved him up to the wide receiver 14. And a big thing that I want to look at with the Cooper Kupp is I think I went against my number one rule in trying to predict a player's performance the following season. So we saw the fall from the wide receiver 7 in 2019 to the wide receiver 30 in 2020. Now, my initial reaction based on seeing this was me going, well, this makes sense, because if we remember at the end of 2019, Cooper Kupp actually lost a decent amount of snaps when they decided to transition a little more over to running a lot of 12 personnel with both Gerald Everett and Tyler Higbee out there on the field. Then all of a sudden, you saw Cooper Kupp kind of being phased out of this offense, where it was really weird that Cooper Kupp was a bona fide top 3 receiver at the first half of the season in 2019. In the second half of the year, he was like a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3. I have no idea what Sean McVay was doing there. Obviously, Sean McVay's way smarter than I am, so of course I can't really say too much about it. And then we saw the fall to wide receiver 30 this past season. And I think we read too much into it about Sean McVay trying to change the game plan slightly, and maybe that didn't necessarily center around Cooper Kupp, where we really dive into it. And it's kind of embarrassing that I didn't just go out and see that Cooper Kupp was someone that averaged over 8 targets a game last year. And while, yes, the yards per target weren't necessarily that high, that's what you should be expecting with Cooper Kupp. This is a slot receiver. This isn't someone that's going to be Deshaun Jackson just running yards, 20 yards down the field, and then all of a sudden that's where he's getting targeted every single time. No, you're going to expect a lower yards per target, so that shouldn't have been a red flag whatsoever. And what shouldn't have been a red flag, and what should have actually been seen as a buy low opportunity, is the fact that Cooper Kupp only scored 1 touchdown every 5 games last year. And what that tells us is that Cooper Kupp has his fantasy points deflated to a point where it doesn't necessarily make sense for the volume that he has. And that's the definition of a player you should go out there and buy low. Because we look at the previous 2 seasons for Cooper Kupp. In both years, Cooper Kupp was actually able to average over 0.5 receiving touchdowns per game. So him falling to 1 receiving touchdown per 5 games, that's a complete outlier. That's something that's going to regress back towards the mean. And he gets the same exact quarterback upgrade that we've been talking about with the Robert Woods. That should help Cooper Kupp just as much. He's playing in an offense that lost Gerald Everett. So I don't think we necessarily need to worry about them running a lot of 12 personnel without a slot receiver on the field. So Cooper Kupp, I have to come out here and I have to just kind of take my L, because I was too low on him. just a few months ago. And yes, we made that adjustment to the rankings. If you pull up the rankings right now, of course, you're going to see Cooper Kupp at wide receiver 14. But yeah, that was an embarrassing ranking that I previously had. And now I know a lot of people are going to go down there and hate me for this next one. Let's throw in Terry McLaurin here as our wide receiver 15. So yes, this is after Chris Godwin. Yes, this is after both Los Angeles Rams receivers. And trust me, guys, I understand Ryan Fitzmagic is in Washington. Now, there are a few different factors in why I'm putting Terry McLaurin down here at wide receiver 15. The first thing that I'm seeing with Terry McLaurin is, honestly, it's kind of funny that a lot of people just want to naturally assume that this is a player that is still very young and still progressing through his NFL career. Terry McLaurin is actually currently older than both Chris Godwin and Juju Smith-Schuster. So that is one thing I want to put in a little context here, because I understand that Terry McLaurin has only played 2 years in the NFL. But you should expect a receiver, when he gets to the NFL at 23, 24 years old, you should expect that player to be significantly more polished than what you're expecting on the other side of the spectrum when someone comes in at 20 or 21. So this is what we talked about last offseason in trying to put into context the rookie season production from the 2019 receiver class that you had with a Deebo Samuel, a Terry McLaurin, an A.J. Brown, and a DK Metcalf. Now, they were all very impressive, their respective rookie seasons, and I came out here and I said they're two completely different kinds of impressive. Terry McLaurin and Deebo Samuel came in after spending 5 years in college, so you should expect them to be good rookies. If they're going to be quality players in the NFL whatsoever, they should be productive right away. That doesn't necessarily say that they have a lot of room to continue to grow. Whereas with the DK Metcalf and A.J. Brown, they come in at 21 years old. They only spend 3 years in college. You see that same rookie production a little bit better, and then all of a sudden you're jumping up and down. You're going, this man is only 22 years old. Imagine what he can be when he fully develops and he's 25, 26. So Terry McLaurin, first off, I know this isn't everything, and of course we're going to dive in a little bit more, but I do want to focus in on the fact that you should not be viewing this player as a typical receiver going into year 3, because a typical receiver that's in an elite tier going into year 3 should, in theory, be about 2 years younger than this. So it's a night and day difference between the context of the receiver. And at the same time, I think that a lot of people are looking at a Terry McLaurin and not necessarily understanding the context behind the production and the offense that he did it in. Where yes, Terry McLaurin had some of the worst quarterback play in the entire NFL. And I will be the first person to admit that. He played with Dwayne Haskins and a broken Alex Smith. Of course, Terry McLaurin had some of the worst quarterback play in the entire NFL, and he is going to be getting an upgrade in Ryan Fitzmagic. Now, I will say, a 38, 39-year-old Ryan Fitzmagic, I think that it's going to be a slight upgrade in what you should expect from a bottom 10 quarterback in the NFL. I mean, I want to come out here and I want to say that Fitzmagic is a bottom 5, bottom 10 quarterback in the NFL. I know a lot of people are going to hate me for saying that. I know a lot of people just see Fitzmagic and what he was able to do in Tampa a few years ago, and they just drool. They just start going, oh my God, did you see what he did with Mike Evans? What he did with Mike Evans back in 2018? Guys, yes, I know. I also saw what he did in New York with a Brandon Marshall, but that's beyond the point right here. That's a long ways away from the quarterback that he is now. Ben Roethlisberger back then was a hell of a quarterback at the same time. So I want to say that Fitzmagic still not an above average quarterback at the NFL level. And what you have also here with Terry McLaurin is the fact that he is seeing significant target competition added into his offense. They go out there, they sign Curtis Samuel to a pretty big deal with his former coach in Ron Rivera. At the same time, they go out, they draft Amari Brown in the 3rd round, Logan Thomas going into his year 2 at the tight end position. And I just want to talk about 2 different parallels here. So Terry McLaurin finishes as the wide receiver 20 in fantasy points last season. We have him ranked as the wide receiver 15. So yes, we're expecting Terry McLaurin to become a better receiver in fantasy this year. Of course, we're expecting that. But let's talk about the jump a lot of people are expecting from Terry McLaurin with the upgrade at quarterback to Ryan Fitzpatrick. A lot of people are projecting him to all of a sudden become a top 10 receiver, where at the same time, another player in this offense has had the exact same thing happen. We all see a Logan Thomas on the other end of the spectrum. And what's so funny is people see that Logan Thomas going into his 2nd year at the tight end position in the NFL, they're expecting him to get worse from where he was last year because they add Curtis Samuel, because they add Amari Brown. They're not focusing in on the Ryan Fitzpatrick upgrade at the quarterback position in that respective. So I think if you're looking at both receivers, yes, there's target competition added in. Yes, I think that a Terry McLaurin should get a small bump up because I would expect the volume possibly goes a little bit down with the other receivers in the offense, but the other receivers in the offense are going to allow Terry McLaurin to operate more freely where the defense isn't going to have to pay enough attention to Terry McLaurin. And at the same time, the bumping quarterback is also going to bump in efficiency, but I would be very surprised and I would be willing to make a bet with anybody. Terry McLaurin almost saw 9 targets a game last year. He's not hitting 9 targets a game this season. I promise you that. I'm still expecting him to become a better receiver. I'm still expecting him to go from wide receiver 20 to wide receiver 15. I'm not expecting him to jump into the top 10 though. So instead of drafting McLaurin, I'm going to be fading McLaurin when he's going in the early third to the middle of the third round. Instead, I'll be drafting CeeDee Lamb. I'll be drafting Allen Robinson. And on the flip side of the spectrum, if I'm drafting someone in Washington, at least a pass catcher, I'm going to go out there and instead I'm going to end up targeting Logan Thomas, who I perceive to be the much better value. So now let's go to our wide receiver 16 and Amari Cooper. Now, Amari Cooper did recently move up our ranking slightly in that you're looking at Amari. Now he's fully healthy, activated from the PUP, and he's going to be, I don't want to say the wide receiver 1. He's going to be the wide receiver 1B to CeeDee Lamb's wide receiver 1A. I think they're going to be very similar, and I'm not going to be surprised whatsoever if Amari Cooper comes out here and he outplays CeeDee Lamb. Now, the difference between Cooper and Lamb is with Cooper, we have seen multiple seasons before where he has never had access to that elite finish. And this is coming from one of the biggest Amari Cooper fans in the world. I mean, y'all know with our last recording setup, I had an Amari Cooper Raiders jersey behind us for I don't know how long because Amari Cooper in that 2015 NFL draft class coming out of Alabama was, in my opinion, one of the best receiver prospects that we have ever seen. So I fell in love with Amari Cooper during the process, and I am always going to be rooting for Amari. But at the same time, if you go through, you look at the past 3 years for Amari Cooper. Last year, the wide receiver 22. I understand Dak Prescott isn't there. Yes, I understand that. The year prior, when he plays the entire season with Dak Prescott, the wide receiver 16. And what is very concerning is Michael Gallup averages more yards per game and Michael Gallup averages more targets per game. And that was his second season in the NFL. So you go back to 2018, the wide receiver 22 again. So we have yet to see an elite finish by Amari Cooper before. I think that he's a very high floor receiver, but I think if CeeDee Lamb is there, Lamb probably has the higher ceiling. And that's why I'm going to have Amari Cooper ranked behind CeeDee Lamb. So now going to who most people have as the receiver 1 in Tampa, let's go down to Mike Evans, who's going to be my wide receiver 17. And here with Mike Evans, guys, I understand. Yes, he did finish right up there with a Chris Godwin. He was the wide receiver 16 in fantasy points per game last year. But a big thing with the Mike Evans is I think the touchdown rate that he actually had was a little unsustainable. So he finishes with 0.8 touchdowns per game. And trust me, guys, I understand Mike Evans, a big-bodied receiver. You should expect him to be a high-volume touchdown scorer. But even the elite of the elite, expecting them to score 0.8 touchdowns per game on only 6.8 targets, that is a ridiculous rate that has to come down this upcoming season. So with the Mike Evans, I will look at this and go, he had less targets per game than Chris Godwin. He had less points per game than Godwin, but at the same time, his touchdown rate was completely unsustainable. So I would expect that touchdown rate to most likely come back down to 0.7, 0.6. And at the same time, it's not like you're expecting Mike Evans to continue to get better. I mean, we already discussed that Chris Godwin came out in that 2017 NFL draft class, 25 years old. Mike Evans came out in the 2014 class out of Texas A&M, and now he is 28 years old. So I think you have a receiver that's probably staying stagnant versus a receiver that's going up. So I know so many people have given us crap for having Chris Godwin ranked over Mike Evans. I don't understand how you could do anything else. And trust me, I started playing Dynasty Fantasy Football. I started evaluating college prospects coming into the NFL back in 2014. So you know I love me some Mike Evans. I am very sentimental with Mike Evans. And Chris Godwin has made me look like an idiot to the point where, you have no idea how bad I whiffed on Chris Godwin in 2019. It was horrendous. I said that if I drafted 100 fantasy teams in 2019, I said this back then, that I wouldn't have taken Chris Godwin in a single one. So you would think that naturally I'd be a little biased in wanting to lean with a player like a Mike Evans over a Chris Godwin. But I think every sign points to Chris Godwin being the better pick for formats this upcoming year. If you're playing in a non-PPR format where there you're more so just chasing touchdowns, sure, go get yourself Mike Evans. But if you're playing in PPR, I want Godwin. Okay, so now our last receiver in this tier, we're going to go with wide receiver 18, Julio Jones. And with Julio Jones, I mean, in 2018, a top 5 receiver. In 2019, a top 5 receiver. 2020, he finishes as the wide receiver 14 on a points per game basis. But a big thing is you need to go through, you need to look at the games where Julio Jones either left early or he just didn't really play at all. Because if you filter out for the games that he played less than 50% of the snaps, because it's completely fair to assume any game that Julio Jones is healthy, he's playing over 50% of the snaps. You go through and you run that filter behind it, and you see that Julio Jones drops down from the wide receiver 14. I mean, he goes down to bring that number to about the wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6. So Julio is essentially coming off of 3 back-to-back-to-back top 5 receiver finishes if you ignore the injured games that he had in 2020. Now, of course, going over to the Tennessee Titans offense, I'm not going to be expecting this to be a good thing for Julio Jones, as you should expect a lower overall passing volume. At the same time, I think that A.J. Brown's clearly going to be the receiver 1 there, and Julio, 32 years old, so it's hard to go through and just naturally assume that we're not going to have to worry about injuries this upcoming season. That can be a real concern that you have to at least think about slightly. So with the Julio Jones, we're going to have him at wide receiver 18. I really can't even consider putting him up above any of the guys we have before him, but please, guys, let me know what you are thinking. And yeah, that should be it. Of course, if you want access to our full 2021 rankings, just overall rankings, tiers, and access to a draft guide with hundreds of pages in it, make sure you use promo code FLOCK on Underdog Fantasy. Go out, go get our draft guide, go get our rankings, hop in a draft with us, deposit $10, Underdog adds $25 into your account. And yeah, that's all I got for you, my dudes, and have a great day. Thank you to everybody supporting the show on Patreon. We got some new members in MCGC, Brian, Matthew, Craig, Ian, Woody, Colt, Marcus, Jack, and Nicholas. Thank you, my dudes.